over the next 3 days. Day 1, we're going to cover the max exploit system. Day 2, the championship blueprint, and day 3, the chip leader war chest. And for those of you who upgraded to VIP, the bonus sections are absolutely fire. So we're excited to answer everyone's personal questions there.
Awesome.
So we really want everyone to get as much out of this experience as possible. We highly recommend that you show up live. It maximizes your opportunities for the interaction and getting your questions answered to make sure you understand it. The other thing is to take notes. You know, there's going to be different pieces and things that one of us might say that resonates with you and can really have a chance to level you up. And so we just recommend writing those down so you don't forget the little spicy details that you loved.
Yeah, and a quick addition to that I want to jump in and say is that like writing is one of the I'm not a note taker. I never was in school, but I've since learned that writing is such an important way to crystallize some of the information in your head. So anything you write down you'll be infinitely more likely to remember. And yeah, I'll let Chance continue.
I found some old notebooks from like 12 years ago that were poker related, and they were like funny to go back and read.
Oh, that must have been cool.
Yeah, and don't hesitate to ask questions. There's going to be some concepts that you might not fully understand. One of us will probably be monitoring the chat, and if there is a question that we, deem necessary to answer, we'll put it up on the screen and then, talk more about it. So for those of you who do not know us, we arrange these in order of least bracelets to most bracelets. I am Chance Corna.
And I am Alex Foxen.
And I'm Kristen. Yeah, you guys knew that, I bet.
I just wanted to say arranged in order of least bracelets.
Yeah, that was a hilarious one. But like Chance tried this joke before, and I reminded him that he has like about 2 or 3 weeks before he can't say that anymore.
Well, I gotta get him in when I can.
Yeah. Understand.
All right, so right off the bat, bulletproof mindset is one of the absolute most important aspects of the game. And, starting off with emotional control, it's going to be really easy to lose hands and go on tilt and stop playing your A game. And that's one of the biggest detriments that you can have while playing poker.
Yeah, I think that this is something that it's not sexy. It doesn't have the most appeal to most people to focus on or to learn. But without this foundation, everything else doesn't matter. Is really the reality of it. It's like you can have the biggest engine in the world, but if the tires don't hit the road, then the car's not going to move. So you need this foundation to allow yourself to be able to implement your knowledge in high pressure and emotionally triggering situations.
Yeah. The one I would highlight for sure is the self-confidence and confidence in general there. And we talk often about how far confidence alone can go. And, you're almost better to be delusionally confident when you sit down versus questioning yourself and having low confidence.
Yeah, when you say questioning yourself, that kind of resonates with me because a lot of people play a hand and then they are like unsure if they should have like played it well or done something different, and then they get stuck thinking about that hand instead of the hands that are to come or the stage of the tournament they're at.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I really like to think about from this perspective is being at peace with the idea that the correct answer in a poker hand will almost always be impossible to nail down. Like, sure, there are examples. Somebody goes all in and you have pocket aces. Well, you made the right decision by calling. But there are other, like basically any situation, any hand, any decision in terms of bet sizing, like all of the inputs and the circumstances that will lead to the quote unquote perfect answer will be impossible to nail down to now or in the future because we're never exactly sure what our opponent is doing, how they're thinking, the circumstances of everyone else at the table, and just recognize that it's an extremely complex game and perfection is impossible.
Yeah.
So our pursuit of optimality is going to be never ending in the sense that we will never get there. So we need to be okay with giving ourselves some leeway to make mistakes. And the importance is coming back to your framework and coming back to your thought processes and the way you see the game, because that's that's really at the end of the day what makes your decision quote unquote right or wrong in my eyes, is whether you thought about the spot the right way, not necessarily whether your inputs or your thoughts were exactly correct in terms of your perception. So the gap between those two things is tough for some people.
And I think that's why, like, a player who is bad theoretically, when they use strategic thinking and are really able to be like, is my opponent bluffing too much here, even if that's not how they're thinking about it in their head, but they're arriving at the right conclusions often because they have good strategic thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the cornerstones of that you can kind of lean on whenever you might feel some kind of like uncertainty about yourself, is like, well, this makes sense logically, and therefore it can't be that far off. Kind of operating from a foundation up.
Yeah, and I think this is so true, especially if you're not a full-time pro, playing every single day. I think it's easy to let tools like GTO Wizard and, a lot of the tools out there really kind of knock your confidence down, because it almost feels like, oh shoot, I don't know all these, I don't know all these solutions. It begins to feel like a situation where you're opening your eyes to how much you don't know. And in a way, especially if you're not a full-time player, I think it's so important to turn that off and then to sort of fall back on, logical thought process, as you say, right? And just having that confidence that you can make a good decision despite the fact that you might not know exactly what GTO Wizard would do in that spot. Because really, we want to nail each spot as it is that spot that you're playing, because it's not going to come up again, right? Like if you're at the WPT win 1100 versus some guy you just played with for the first time, you're not going to play that hand again with him probably ever. So let's nail the right decision in that spot. We don't need to think about balance and overall range and all of these concepts. And I think that's really important. And I think that when you let that go, it's a really good way to increase your confidence and to feel better about your decision making.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And a little challenge for everyone, in this or in any of the other chip leader coaching content. I've been Googling words that Alex has said for 8 years, and I still have not found one that was fake. And so I will give some type of referral to anyone who can shit me one.
Me too, but I might have found one. I can't remember which one. So.
Yeah, conveniently can't remember, but she found one.
Oh, man. I really wish I had it. This is like so important. Performance matters more than skill. Like there's so many poker players out there who say they can take a poker test and they get sent to hand with some stipulations, what the ICM constraints are, and they pass the test. But then they get on the poker table and they cannot get the right answer. That is going to be just a serious roadblock. You're never going to be able to be successful if you're only good theoretically, but you cannot apply the information that you have.
Yeah, and I think that one of the major disconnects in this regard is the way most people think. And the problem with the disconnect from your skill level or your knowledge level to your performance is often going to be your ability to replicate a thought process and a mental framework in game. So that is why our general philosophy towards teaching poker and learning poker is very framework based and very general in terms of its approach to each spot. We're not necessarily looking for the right answer in this individual spot. We're looking for the right way to think about this spot, the right things to focus on, and how different aspects of the hand. Is my opponent bluffing too much? Is my opponent bluffing too little? How those things are going to determine what the correct answer is. And, let's say we have a spectrum of someone bluffing never on this end and bluffing 100% of the time when they don't have a value hand on this end. Well, we know we're always going to be somewhere in the middle of those two things. So the question is, like, our perception is just figuring out where we are within that spectrum, and being able to focus on that and having a simple framework as far as the way that you think will allow you to basically project your skill into your performance at a higher frequency.
Yeah. So there's two types of poker players, and I really love some of the graphics. There's two types of poker players, and I really love some of the graphics that we use for these. There's the break-even losing player who's afraid of change. And everyone knows that player that blames luck. They're like, well, if I ran as good as you, then I would have all the success. But in reality, they lack self-confidence and self-belief. They're probably projecting that information. And one of the biggest things that I notice is risk adverse.
Yeah, I think afraid of change. All of these things work together. Someone who's afraid of change, and they all kind of tie back to ego protection, if you ask me, which also ties back to mindset. And that's kind of why we're building from the mindset outward. Is where someone who's afraid of change is very likely very likely that way because of their ego's desire to protect itself and to keep the status quo. New things can cause us to question ourselves and potentially find out inaccuracies that we have in terms of our perception of the world or individuals or the way something works. So having that it's like loose, what is the saying? Strong convictions held loosely. That's like a phrase and that's commonly used in investing, I think, because you want to be able to change your opinion very quickly, but you also want to have a high degree of confidence in what you believe. And these two things might seem diametrically opposed, but they're not. They might seem like opposite each other, but they're really, you can hold both at the same time. And I think that when we get past this, when we get to the point of accepting that our knowledge base is finite and limited, it prevents us from blaming luck and circumstance. It allows us to embrace change. It increases our confidence and our belief in ourselves, and it makes us more comfortable taking risks. So it will actually, when you start from that base, it will begin to alleviate the issues that kind of radiate upwards throughout this graphic here.
Yeah, it's a domino effect. And I just want to say that I think a lot of the afraid of change and blaming luck and circumstances is just that some people actually don't know anything else, right? Like, you don't know what you don't know in poker. And that's what's so, I think, why coaching, getting an outside eye on your game is so important, and trying to take in new concepts and learn new things is so important, because until you start to open your eyes to, better ways at looking at situations and, just gaining greater knowledge, you will blame luck and circumstances, because that is the player who says, I got down to 20 big blinds and got all in with ace king. What can I do? I just got unlucky. And it's like, okay, you forgot to question all of the other spots, but sometimes we just don't know what they are. And we actually don't realize that you could be playing other hands in a different way. So I think that a lot of this just has to do with kind of limiting yourself to thinking you know everything already.
Yeah, and it's difficult when you're losing to not blame luck. Like this summer, one of my performance goals was to go home after I played and reflect on my day. What mistakes did I make? What did I do well? What did I do poorly? And on days where I just got my shit kicked in, I couldn't even think of anything except for getting all in with ace king against fives, and it flops ace and river five, right? And it was so hard for me to focus on the things that I could control. So it is not an easy task, and it does take like the neuroplasticity, like Alex mentioned before, to get better at it.
Yeah.
And practice.
Yeah. For sure. But I think
go on.
No, I was just going to say, what's so interesting to me is, even through my poker career, I can say for Alex's and, students that I've had the chance to coach, is that as soon as we start, recognizing these spots that we can change, I think the number two, the blaming luck and circumstances, starts to fade away, and you can get yourself in a better mind frame and mindset for poker, which is, as you said, it's like a domino effect.
Yeah, and the goal we want to be like, I think it's a fine line that most people walk in terms of the struggle between caring about results and being frustrated with luck or lack thereof. And I think the best medicine for that is to be entirely process focused, and your goal should be to improve your process at the table, improve the way you think about spots. And sure, you might have lost aces versus kings for chip lead on day 3, but Did you pay off a 10 big blind river bet a couple hours before that maybe you could have folded to, and you did it because, you had this, this emotional kind of lack of control of your decision-making process in that moment that led to this? Well, maybe that would have changed the dynamic. Maybe this player that got kings against your aces now has 10 big blinds more. You would have been left with 20 instead. Like the cascading effect of good decisions is can't be overstated. And I think that because of that, we need to learn to focus on that. And in doing so, we will remove the frustration with bad luck to a large extent.
Yeah, and that's why people on heaters continue to crush, in my opinion, is they get away, they save those 4 or 5 big blinds. They fold, they make a disciplined turn fold instead of an easy river fold, or they find that turn double barrel and win the pot instead of being scared and checking back. And so when they're faced with a flip that they lose, they're still in the tournament.
Yeah.
Yep. 100%.
So or just the next player.
Yeah, or when they lose it, they feel okay about it.
The opposite, surprise. Yeah. So the winning player with the bulletproof mindset invests in improving themselves and their skills. And
it's like Hunter, the picture. Sorry. And also.
It does look like Hunter.
$50,000 lifetime for coaching. And naturally, when I first started off, I was playing like a little bit per month to Blue Fire or whatever the Card Runners coaching site was back in the day. And learning to take accountability for my actions. And that's one of the things that really drew me to poker was if I work hard and I have success, I can promote myself and play higher stakes. And, supreme confidence in their abilities, like that's something that comes with time, I would say. It's not something that you just like have this delusional confidence, as Alex mentioned before. It is
some people do
turned around. And a high risk tolerance. You have to be willing to make a decision based on a logical thought process. Whether it's, purchasing coaching, like, everyone here took the first step, right? Taking that risk of buying a coaching product is a risk, right? It's just like taking a risk that's a plus EV decision to bluff a river or to call in a spot that might be scary, but not attaching your decisions to emotions and using a logical breakdown for your actions.
Yeah, and I think it's just like the last slide. This works the same way. It starts from the bottom up, and each rung of the ladder helps you, kind of improve to the next one. When you put time and money into improving yourselves, whether it be playing more, studying more, working with a coach, buying a boot camp, whatever it is, that will give you a little bit more confidence in your ability. It will allow you to take more accountability for your action instead of blaming luck. You can, and this works both ways. When you win, you feel more responsible. When you lose, you feel more responsible, which is, it might seem like a scary thing. And that's why I think most people avoid it. But I think this radical, extreme, like self kind of, this like, blaming yourself for everything, for your circumstances, can seem irrational to some extent, but I think it can be extremely productive in that I find myself walking away from a poker tournament nearly always being like, what could I have done to prevent myself from losing? Even if I lost aces versus kings, just like the example I gave before, I'm like, well, how could I have had more chips to have been able to withstand that? Or how could I have won this pot against this same opponent before that would have meant that they had less chips so that when my aces got cracked, I didn't lose as much? Like, everything is a domino effect, like Chrissy mentioned before. And I think that when we start to see it that way, things grow at a rapid pace, and our focal point becomes our actions and our decisions and our thought process rather than the outcome or the luck or the flip or the hands.
Yeah. And I just want to add, I actually think that when you get yourself when you're more aligned with this mindset, poker is actually way more fun, because learning is fun. And I think that then all of a sudden you're going into sessions, more curious, paying attention. And to me, it just, even when you are on a downswing or losing, it's just way more fun.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you guys have heard, and to everyone in the chat as well, like, how many times have you heard someone bust something and said, whatever, like, I played perfect today? Like, I've heard that so many times.
And how many times is that a great player?
And yeah, exactly where I'm going.
Very infrequently.
I've never heard an elite player say that in my entire life, because the elite players are sitting there thinking, Yeah, I mean, that river value bet got called, but he sure called pass. Maybe he was inelastic and would have called any bet size. Thinking about all of those little things that they could have done better. They bet third pot. Maybe they think they should have bet 40%, right? So just looking at those little things you can improve on, that whole 1% better every day just compounds and compounds.
Yeah, a big blind here and there adds up. So that's, the small spots are really important. And I feel like people like to just gloss over that. And honestly, I think it's a little bit lazy.
Yeah, and I think that the Band-Aid that a lot of people use for this, and I don't want to belabor this point too much, but I'll just say that the Band-Aid that most people use for this is to disconnect and to remove their emotions and to say, I don't care about the result. I'm just here to like punch the clock. I'm going to make my decisions and collect my EV. That is how a lot of people approach the game. And I think that although this is safer from an emotional standpoint, I think it's also going to cap your ability to improve. Whereas this ownership of your decision making and ownership of the outcome is going to make you feel like shit sometimes when you bust. So I'd rather go into every day with the expectation that I'm going to win and have to deal with the disappointment of being wrong and have to deal with the disappointment of losing, rather than going into every day expecting to lose to protect myself from that disappointment. Because when you're expecting to lose, when you're expecting to, the outcome, it's like, well, 80% of the time I bust. Like, yeah, those numbers are true, but I'm going to expect today to be the 20% every single time, because that's going to cause me to look for every little angle, every little edge, every little better decision that I could make, instead of just being like, well, top of my range, call. It's like, well, maybe if I really look at this spot in depth, it doesn't matter that I'm at the top of my range, and it doesn't, like, this opponent just frankly isn't bluffing enough to have any kind of bluff catchers. Maybe that's the case. Maybe it's not, and the call is fine. But the point is that you need to be focusing on the right things in order to increase your ability to improve.
Yeah, and one of the things I do with mindset is I think of every tournament or session or whatever that I play as a good opportunity. So I don't have an expectation attached to it. Like, I don't sit down and I'm going to win this tournament. There's 700 people, because I think that's kind of like a delusional confidence type of thing. And also, like you said, it really kind of hurts more when you bust, when you have that mindset. So like when I enter a tournament and it doesn't go my way, I think of it as, well, that was a good opportunity. It's okay that it didn't pan out.
That's a good way to soothe yourself after the fact. But I would say, like, going into it, it's like there's usually a path to victory in every tournament. If you make every decision perfect, like, you'll probably win most tournaments, and that's impossible to do, but we want to strive for that. And kind of going in with the expectation that I have minimal control over the outcome, I think prevents us from looking for those spots where we can increase our level of control over the outcome.
Yeah, for sure. Somehow you're super white again, Alex.
Yeah.
It's when you lean one direction.
Okay. Maybe.
But I will introduce the next slide. So there's some common mindset leaks that we, after our years of coaching, have kind of seen the most often. The first is conscious mistakes, like knowingly making the wrong decisions by trying to get revenge on other players. Or if I used to have this one where if someone was table captain, I would really want to go after them. And that was kind of a big issue.
Oh, it's like you and Alex playing together.
Yeah, exactly. And the other conscious mistake is I used to do this all the time, where I would make a bet or an action and I'd be like, oh, that was bad. And a lot of the conscious mistakes, in my opinion, can be fixed just by slowing down a little bit. Mm-hmm. Like on a pre-flop open, sure, you know what range you want to open in a spot, but 3 bets and turn bets and river decisions, those are big decisions, and they often require a lot more thought put into them before clicking the button. I think a lot of people are scared under pressure, but it's not just the increased fear of losing or making mistakes. I think it's also the fear of looking stupid.
Yeah. That's a huge one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I think a lot of people end up not playing very well on streams if they're inexperienced, because the weight of the eyes on every decision that they make, it prevents them from being able to think clearly. And this all, again, we're building out this, from the ground up in the way that we're approaching this, and these go back to the mindset aspects that we mentioned in previous slides, where when we have control over our emotions, we don't make these conscious mistakes quite as often. And we don't feel the fear of being under pressure because we know we can lean on our thought process. We can lean on our framework that we have. We can lean on all of these things that we've learned and all this time that we've put into the game to lead us to good decisions. And if someone doesn't agree or understand or see what you're doing, I mean, obviously everyone can make mistakes, but a general, this is something that I try to remind any student, anyone that's close to me at like a final table or something, is that if someone thinks what you did is a mistake, it's very likely they don't understand the parameters that you're using to solve the problem. Maybe they don't realize how infrequently this person has been being aggressive on the turn, or maybe they don't realize that this player, bet a sizing that they've never done before, and it's extremely unlikely to be a bluff. So we folded a hand that you're supposed to call with, and like having all of these kind of different things to focus on allows us to have a lot more confidence under these high pressure situations. And moving on to the self-sabotage, I think this is a fascinating one to me, because I think that this is one of the reasons why so many people have immediate results after putting some kind of effort into learning or getting coached or whatever. Because I've seen this almost every single time I've ever started with a new one-on-one student. Within a month or two, they win something. And I honestly, I cannot.
Same.
I wish I could take credit for it, like I really do, but it's not my coaching that does it. It's maybe helping 1%, but what's really happening is they're now seeing themselves as someone who's thinking better, as someone who's improving themselves, as someone who's taking steps to become a better player, and they feel that they deserve to win now. Whereas when you're just showing up like that subconscious, like, well, I probably didn't work as hard as this guy. I probably don't know as much as him. I probably haven't put in as much effort. Like that will creep in and prevent you from being able to make your best decision in a high situation.
I think it's also the fact when you're getting coaching or have a community to talk hands with after, you play a hand that you're unsure about. And if you're getting one-on-ones from you or in the community, like I said, you know that you can go and decide what you should have done later, and you don't have to think about it anymore. And so all of a sudden, all of the mental RAM, the mental processing power goes towards focusing on the next decision. And I do think that that's one of the biggest reasons that it helps as well.
Yeah. And I think it just takes people out of the pattern of autopiloting, right? Like you're thinking about every decision. And I think that that's sometimes you need that accountability in order to do that. And then emotional decisions. Hating to fold because you don't want to get bluffed, which leads to bad calls and bets that aren't profitable. I think that this is something a lot of people struggle with, is the emotional decisions. We can see it in our opponents all the time. And I think that that's, Alex, when you talk about the parameters of making decisions in a hand and why it's really important to be confident in the decision you're making, it's because maybe you're aware of an opponent that you can tell is emotional, and, the parameter that you're, making your decision is influenced heavily by, something that your opponent's doing. And you might not be able to portray that well to a friend, to a spectator. And that's why I think it's so important, going back to that confidence again, and like having trust in yourself in the driver's seat is so important. And obviously all of this stuff is tied together. But, I think that the emotional side is something, not only to be aware of in your own game, but other people's games, because there's just so much information to be gained there.
Yeah, and emotional decisions really speaks to me, because there's been so many times, like countless literally in my career, where I've been like, this would be such a sick bluff, or this would be such a sick call. And that's like the definition of an emotional decision. When I tell myself that before punting it off or making a terrible call, like my win rate in those situations is so low, and it's because my emotions are creeping in over my logical brain that might tell me whether or not it was what the decision should be.
Totally.
And it's your ego too, being like, oh yeah, this will be, we'll be really glad, because your ego doesn't care about like it does in one way, but in that moment, it doesn't care about like your EV in the game. It doesn't care about your win rate. It cares about like, showing that card that proves that you were bluffing, and then it's like, I'm the man for a second. And I think that the same thing goes both ways. Like, sometimes your ego will tell you, hey, this guy's picking on you. You can't let him pick on you. And like, sometimes that might be true, but oftentimes it's not. It's kind of like the main character syndrome effect existing within poker. Most things that happen are not going to be someone targeting you. It's very, very rare that that's going to be happening. And let's face it, at an 8-handed poker table, even if someone was trying to like target you, they're going to cost themselves money most of the time, because like you can't play heads up against one person with 6 other people at the table. If you're going to be making some like huge adjustments to try to go after someone, it's just not going to work very well. Maybe what might happen is you're opening really wide, so therefore they're 3-betting more, and see this as just like an appropriate strategic adjustment on their part, instead of them targeting you. It's like they're just responding to your wider opening range, for example. And seeing all of these things from the perspective of purely being a removed strategist will help alleviate those emotional aspects of it. So in other words, I want you to try your best to not remove dynamic from the situation, not ignore the past hands that have happened, your open frequency, your 3-bet frequency, your stack size, the position in the tournament. Don't ignore all of those things, but kind of try to see them from a third party, as if you're watching 2 different people play, and understand that's probably going to lead you to a more accurate perception of the situation than seeing it from your own stream of consciousness, which will be inherently biased by your ego and other emotional elements.
Well, and think about how easy it is to know what's going on in a hand when you're not in it. When you see 2 people playing a hand and you're like, oh, man, if he calls here, he's out of the tournament, or like, this guy's so obviously
happens
bluffing
all the time.
And you're just always right?
Yeah.
And that like really speaks to what you just said, and it's truth. Because when you're in a hand, you're just like, I think of it as like too zoomed in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, what you just described is the opposite
Yes.
of that, right? You're zoomed all the way out. You're kind of picturing these people playing. It really is the opposite of being too zoomed in.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
I wanted to circle back to fear under pressure. In 2023 WSOP, I had my best WSOP ever. I had 5 or 6 final tables, and then I would get to the final table and I would just like bring the B game. And I was just like super unhappy about it. And I did some reflection and tried to figure out why. And it really was fear under pressure. I was afraid of looking stupid when getting to those final tables. I had no fear of that at all. I would 3-bet hands that weren't theoretical 3-bets because I was confident that someone was weak. But then all of a sudden I would get to the final table and I'd be on stream and I'd be like, oh, well, if this doesn't work, I'm going to look stupid. And 24, I didn't make as many final tables, but I just told myself that I didn't care what other people thought anymore. And ever since then, I've just been playing so much better on stream. Yeah. And you have to remember that like what you do to get to that stage of the tournament, you probably shouldn't just stop doing because people can see now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that goes back to what I said before, which I think is extremely important. And I really want everyone to try this. And it might not always be true, but I think it's better to think it's true, whether it is or not, which is that if someone doesn't understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, it's their lack of understanding. It's not my mistake. And I think this will help you not feel pressure in those situations to do what others might perceive to be correct. Because at the end of the day, we are tribal animals, and we desire, the validation of others, because evolutionarily that was very important for our survival. If we weren't accepted by our tribe, you probably died. So people who have no regard for others' approval are very, very rare. If not non-existent or psychopathic, it's not a very common thing, but we need to set that aside, because that is a hindrance within poker.
Yeah.
And it's something that so many people struggle with.
Yeah. I really actually love the driving analogy now that I'm thinking about it, because I think about, when you're driving and you have backseat drivers, it's pretty much the thing that would make you drive the worst, right? You have people in the backseat telling you what to do, especially if you're just beginning to drive or, it's your first few years. But even after driving,
anyone who's married knows exactly what this is like.
Yes, nobody likes a backseat driver. And I think when people get on stream, it's almost as if you're experiencing that, because you can feel that all of a sudden you have hundreds, maybe thousands of backseat drivers watching you. And then you're sitting there thinking or hearing voices, right? Like, what would they think? What would they think? What does this look like? What does this look like? And all of a sudden it's like your driving ability just goes way down. So
you're paralyzed. What happens is you're paralyzed.
Yeah. I don't want to jump ahead too far, but I think that it's so important.
Go to the next one?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's weird.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say, I think everybody is more inclined to one of these than others. And I think just trying to, learn about where are your mental leaks coming from, right? Which category? Because I think, someone like Alex, you don't really struggle with the confidence, the fear of looking bad. Like, that's not what resonates with you. But I think that, it's a good, just even having the framework of trying to learn, like, oh, wait, this is actually something I struggle with. It's just important. And we're going to talk more about that later. So.
Yeah. And the importance of self-belief is one of the most crucial aspects of developing a bulletproof confidence. And this is a quote from Foxen, Alex. I knew I could compete at the highest level in poker, but I didn't have anything to show for it other than just the feeling. And this was way, way back in the day before Alex was Alex. And it just kind of illustrates the knowing he has the skills. He lacked the results, but still believed in himself. Mm-hmm. He couldn't get support from backing. Like, he had to play satellites and stuff like that. And it just really inhibited his growth, but he still believed in himself.
Yeah. And that, I really think that without that, it's basically impossible to get to any real high level. Like, you have to, so many circumstantial things have to line up for you to be able to get to any significant level of poker without this self-belief. There's a moment that I'll forever remember when I was like, I had just graduated college and I was living at my mom's house playing semi-professional at the time. Like, I had just quit my job that I had for 2 months to play poker. And I'm on break from like a, 109 session, like playing like 109s and below on ACR. This is like 10 years ago. And I came upstairs to, and saw my mom, and I just like said to her, like, I'm going to play the highest poker tournaments that exist, and I'm going to win. And I had no, like I said, no good reason to believe. I knew that I could do it. And I also just know that believing in that is the first step to having it potentially become real. It's not the other way around. It really isn't.
Yeah, I mean, everyone that has success in sports or anything, I think sports is the best example, because there's tons of athletes that got interviewed and they had that. They basically like, well, I just knew that one day I was going to play in the NFL, or one day this was what I was going to do. I was going to be the best in the world at tennis, right? And when you have that belief, all of a sudden you figure out what steps you need to take to get there. And there's a big difference between having like a dream and a goal, right? A dream is just like, maybe one day I'll be a billionaire or a millionaire, right? But then say I want to be a millionaire one day, or a great poker player, let's just use the more realistic example here. You can start breaking it down into these little micro tasks. And it really helps to not feel like you're climbing up a mountain, because you're accomplishing all these little things over and over.
One great line from my college football coach. I was not a fan of this coach, but he had this one line that he repeated over and over that has stuck with me. And it is, fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
And I think that is so important from a number of different things. I think you need to imagine yourself. And I saw some of the comments in the chat talking about manifestation. And I do believe that has a lot of power. So seeing yourself as like where you want to be, knowing that that's not the person, like the results don't follow, you don't become that because of the results. You get the results because you've already become that.
Yeah. And you certainly don't become that if you're questioning yourself.
So I think that
Right.
you need to ask yourself, like, what does a high level poker player do? How do they think? How do they approach this spot? How do they feel in this moment? And we need to, it doesn't matter if it's not your authentic, like natural knee jerk reaction to the situation. We need to try our best to become that, to do that, because that is how eventually, if you keep pretending to be, this person, that will become who you are. And it's like, what does a professional athlete do? Well, they eat well, they exercise. It's like, okay, so I'm going to try to mimic that. And you like, a year goes by, 2 years go by, all of a sudden you look at your body, you're like, oh, I'm in good shape. I used to be like out of shape, and now I just pretended like I was a professional athlete, and now I'm starting to look like one. It's like that's kind of the vision is it precedes the result and not the other way around. So we need to establish that belief before you can achieve your highest level of success.
Yeah. And we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, so I'm going to advance on the slides here. Cool. So how do we craft a bulletproof mindset? Well, oftentimes it's easier to start with what you should not do and consume without progress. People go through endless content, whether they're watching vlogs or going through solvers, reading books, watching videos, etc., without applying the concepts. You can't learn without applying. And that's why the three of us always say the importance of putting in volume. Because when you put in volume, you see that it's like, okay, I'm not really comfortable in, defending the big blind or check raising, or when I'm faced with a check raise. How do I put in work in that area? And if you're just learning and learning and learning, all of a sudden you get out on the felt, and you're just going to default to what you knew before because you're not implementing the things that you learned.
Yeah, and this is something I was just thinking about. I was thinking about this yesterday. The importance of experience, and one like etymological aspect that's interesting to think about is like the root of the word experience and expert. So ex is like a Latin suffix for away from. It's like from or away from, and per is through. So experience, and like the IENCE is like knowledge, like conscience, science, like it's about learning. So the word is basically knowledge taken away from by going through something. And the word expert is someone who has taken a lot of knowledge from experience, from going through something. It's not someone who sits on the sideline and watches. It's someone who does the things and feels them and is able to gain from this experience that they have. They're pulling knowledge away from something that they've been through. And I think that's another thing that a lot of people struggle with in poker, is because that's difficult, that's uncomfortable, and that requires a high level of confidence to be able to go through these things with a conscious mindset, with a focus on the process, with a focus on the framework. Whereas it's a lot easier to just watch a video of some guy talking about how to build out your defending versus check raise range. But until you actually go out and do it, the true knowledge that you have that will be able to apply to other things is not going to be there.
Yeah.
So Chrissy, I think with bad habits, you probably have the most knowledge, not in bad habits, but just in knowing all of the health stuff. And like, I've always been one, like I'm, over 3 years sober now, but I used to do a lot of, drinking or smoking weed or partying or whatever after a bad session or a good session, or, eating tons of unhealthy food. And how do you think that affects the brain, the person, short-term and long-term?
I mean, one thing that's so interesting is if you go into the Poker Go studio or, a Triton poker series, and you're, kind of observing the best players in poker right now, there's an obsession with health. And this comes from, diet, sleep, even, mindset things, meditation. I think that you can't underestimate, poker really is a brain sport, a practice of, brain health, let's say even. And I think, exercise without a doubt makes such a beneficial impact on your game and how you think. Diet, I think, is everything. That's kind of one of my passions. So I'm a big believer that, what we put in our bodies is very important. And, if you work out and, eat well, the way that you feel is just tremendous. As if, you don't sleep for 4 hours, you eat shitty food, and then go try to play poker in that frame of mind it's night and day. And I think the more poker you play, and especially if you get deep in a tournament, I think this becomes even more important. There's some tournaments, 4-day, 5-day tournaments, all of a sudden there's a ton of adrenaline, it's hard to sleep. There's access to really bad food at casinos, so I think it's important to stay away from that. But yeah, I just think, and outside of like lifestyle bad habits, this could even go back to the bad habits of complaining about bad beats, things like that. Like I would want to highlight that too, with what not to do.
Good point. Yeah.
So I think all of those little habits that really, they're just huge.
Well, and Alex mentioned earlier, like if you look at a professional athlete and that's your goal, you're going to try to emulate them, right? Like let's look at the top of the poker world. And if you look at the U.S., right, we're only going to use the U.S. and we're going to say, look at the people who are like out of shape versus in shape. And then if you look at the top of the poker world, the percentages don't align. There's way more successful in shape people who care about their mental fitness, their physical fitness at the top. And that's because they see the importance of good habits.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is one of the most telling elements of like, it used to be like we were talking about, you want to fake it till you make it. Well, you look around the room of like a high roller poker tournament and good luck finding someone who's like overweight and out of shape. It's very rare.
I mean, someone said Sean Deeb in the chat, which is he's kind of an interesting one.
There are exceptions for sure. Yeah. No, like I'm not trying to claim that it's like impossible to succeed at poker without being in shape, but you will see a pretty strong correlation between people who are focused on health and playing at the highest level, because at the end of the day, Deeb is an example of someone who succeeds despite his lack of health, not because of it. He is able to overcome that, and I would argue that he would probably be at least somewhat of a better player if he were able to fix his health and to put more focus on that. So he's not even necessarily a counterexample. He's just someone who's able to overcome that.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys have anything else to add on what not to do before I move on?
No, I mean, the inconsistency, I think, is another one that just like is so important. And, always was one of the things that I think all three of us share this very much in terms of like our approach towards poker was we just, played and played and played and tried to get better and tried to get better. Like there was no relenting on that goal. It was always whether we won or lost, it's like, all right, we're back at it the next day. How do I improve this spot? How do I improve myself? And it's easy to do that in short spurts, but it's really difficult to do that over a long period of time. And the results come from the consistency. So I think
that what to do yet. That's the next slide, Alex.
And I will, if I can add one thing and what not to do is, stop protecting your ego, right? It's like that's what everybody's trying to do. They want to say, I got unlucky, instead of kind of taking ownership for mistakes they might be making. So I think, just stop.
Let me tell you right now, the reason that you're not playing the highest stakes of poker is not because you run bad. I promise you.
And because they don't respect your raises at the lower stake.
That's not it. That's not the reason. I can confidently.
I mean, that's actually a great excuse we hear, right? Well, at low stakes, it's so hard because X blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, that's not an excuse. This is
ego. It's all an ego protection mechanism. And once you see that for what it is, I think it's actually like, it's a great indicator. Don't ignore your emotions. Use them as an indicator of where you need to look. So if it's something like, oh, I'm only doing this because of this, it's like, well, why do I feel that way? Why am I saying this? There's probably something to that, and there's some lesson in there.
Yeah, and I saw some jokes about like drugs for, can help you focus and stuff like that. And one of the things that really makes me think about is like Adderall or, whatever you want to do. But it makes it impossible to do long term, right? Like you do Adderall for a few years and it kind of F's you up.
Yeah, they become
so
crutches.
you have to be really careful, and that's why the people at the top of the game have figured out ways to do it healthily, working out, eating the right foods, making sure you get enough sleep, all of those different aspects. So now we're going to focus a little bit more on what to do, and obviously we've kind of touched on these a little bit, but self-analysis. Track your hands and emotional states to identify patterns. Writing these down makes them real and helps your brain recognize them faster in time. I also think that I mentioned before, when you write down a hand that you want to review later, it helps you not continue to think about it at the table.
Yeah. And if I could just add something, I think it's so important to see the opportunity to find something that you can improve on is like, it's such a great thing because you just get to instantly improve your win rate when you're like, oh, wow, I've been playing this spot wrong. Or, oh, wow, I could do this better. Oh, this is me. I'm struggling with being emotional when X, Y, and Z happens. Then all of a sudden, it's just like an instant boost to your win rate because you get to identify this leak. And I think that a lot of people, they don't want to identify those leaks because it protects their ego. It makes them feel better to just say, I got unlucky. So I think the self-analysis and just trying to actually find the leaks and taking anything personal, you're not a bad person if all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm playing too passive from my big blind. It's like, that doesn't make you a bad person. We just found a way that, maybe we can improve your poker win rate. So that's a great thing. So I just wanted to add the fact that the self-analysis thing, I think some people have a hard time with that on an emotional level, but to try to reframe it as such a great opportunity to improve your win rate.
Yeah. I'm constantly after ways to improve myself, whether it's on the table or off the table. And it's difficult to find things that move the needle. Like self-improvement is not necessarily easy, especially if it's something that you've put a lot of effort into. So when you find something, it's like the excitement that I feel when it's like, oh, this supplement might help with this. Or if I get, sunlight in my eyes first thing in the morning, it helps me sleep better. All of these things. And the same goes for poker, of course. Am I defending my big blind too wide, or am I defending my big blind not enough? It's like, oh, this is a profitable defend here against a normal opening range. Well, I didn't know that. I thought that this was supposed to be a folder. I thought that this was supposed to be a call, and it's a fold. Like, great. I've been doing how I've been doing, whatever my results have been, despite this lack of knowledge. So now that I add this, it's going to improve. So to see it from that perspective is really helpful. And we need to remove it's all about removing the ego. And I think, like, I saw someone in the chat say before that, poker is a microcosm of life, and it really is. But one of the most important ways to improve is to, your ego is like, a major motivator and a driver of success, but it's also an inhibitor and like an anchor on a lot of your success, because it wants you to be content with who you are right now, because your ego is like your current moment self. So being critical of that self will upset your ego. And I want people to try to start seeing this ego as something separate from themselves. Like the ego is kind of like this separate entity that's not necessarily you.
For sure. And I just wanted to say, as far as tracking hands, because that's something that, obviously is so important. John said any other ways to write them down instead of like on a phone. And I would just say, I actually have witnessed a few people using a notepad and a pen. And I actually think that that's a really great way to do it, because then it keeps you off your phone, which, I can't stress enough. So, which is a benefit while you're playing poker is, no social media while playing poker.
Yeah, like mindfulness is something like that part of this slide really speaks to me. Like early in my career, I found Tommy Angelo, who was like the OG poker mindset expert before any of the Elliott Rose or Jared Timlers or anything like that. And I bought it because I was staking two people who were absolute like tilt monkeys. And I got it thinking it would help them. They still remain tilt monkeys, don't play poker anymore, but it actually changed my life. And I think of it as like, first I'm going to read what it says a little bit, but like using breath work and other techniques to stay focused. And so like, I kind of think of our brains as this like pond, right? And when you throw tilt or a rock into the pond, there's all these ripples, and it makes it more difficult to think clearly. And using mindfulness or breathing really allows me to like calm that pond. And like, that would be like the kind of Eastern way to describe it. And then the way I would describe it from like a computer perspective is, you have all these other apps open on your phone or your computer. It's not going to run as quickly. You need to put all of your RAM into one thing in order to make the best decisions you can.
Yeah, and I think to expand on the pond analogy a little bit, I think that a cool thing to think about is like look at a pond when it's completely still and there's no wind and it's a beautiful day. Like you can see the reflection of the sky and everything perfectly in that pond. But as soon as there's any bit of wind, it becomes a lot harder to see that reflection. And I think that's a good way to see your brain is like your brain is like this pond reflecting reality. And when you throw obstacles or rocks or tilt or bad beats or whatever into it, it does cause this rippling effect, and being able to calm that and quiet that is one of the best ways to be able to accurately, because these ripples might distort your view of the reality, your view of the sky. But once we calm that and it's flat again, we see it for what it really is.
Yeah. And this is something that it is kind of a specific question and maybe better for the VIP session, but I do think it's a good one to answer here. What about music when playing? So I personally know that I have I almost think of it as like a fragile mind where the music actually makes me harder for me to play my best. But Alex is listening to like this, I'm selling drugs or I'm killing you music. And it's, so it's just to each his own.
Funny, I've actually shifted that recently for what it's worth.
Really?
I've basically exclusively listened to Chopin piano, the, 1800s composer for the last couple months. Big shift in my music choice. I know. I complete 180 in terms of what music I listen to. But there's something about it that I've found incredibly soothing, and almost feels like it's like raising my vibration and bringing me to a higher level of consciousness in a kind of very interesting way. So I've really enjoyed that. But for me, music helps act as like a metronome that creates a cadence for my thoughts. And I find it really helpful in that way. But yes, everyone's different, and it's important to be willing to analyze your own difference. It goes back to the self-analysis. Yeah. Without this self-analysis, Chance might still be listening to music to this day, not realizing that it's affecting his ability to think. Or, even me with some of this music that I used to listen to, I think that there were some benefits that I drew from it, but there were also some drawbacks. And without that self-analysis, I wouldn't have noticed that. And I'd still, we'd both still be going on doing things that are suboptimal.
Yeah. I'm moody in that sense.
Yeah. The next topic is a little bit controversial, I might say. Why are solvers making people worse at poker?
It's our favorite topic.
I know. I absolutely love this one. So first, what are solvers? They're programs that calculate game theory optimal strategies. And it's actually, I'll continue to go through before we really break it down. How do they work? They're algorithms where computers strive to achieve break-even strategies against each other. The technical requirements are a betting range, the stack sizes, all of the inputs that you put into them. So Alex, this is something that I think you should at least take the lead on. This is, one of the ones you're great at discussing.
I agree.
Yeah, well, so I think that, solvers are very, very interesting, for one. And before we get too far in the weeds of discussing their merits and their drawbacks, I want to make it clear to everyone how exactly a solver operates. And I'm going to put it into this very simple explanation that I think a lot of people, believe it or not, don't even really, either they don't understand or they haven't consciously thought about before. But what a solver is doing is creating a strategy that it can share with its opponent and still not lose any money. So basically, it's two computers playing against each other, let's say in a heads-up pot, and it's trying to find out what the strategy that both players can take and reveal this strategy to each other so that each player knows exactly what the other player is doing in every single spot and still be incapable of winning money from one another. Now, when you put it in those terms, I think it becomes a lot easier to see that this is not the best way to win at poker, to try to replicate a strategy that was designed under the belief or the attempt to create an unexploitable strategy when someone else knows everything that you do. How about maybe our opponent doesn't know everything that we do and will do things that are predicated on our understanding of their inconsistencies and their mistakes. So the other side of it that's extremely important is to recognize the limitations of our own cognitive function. solvers require an incredible amount in order to reach this state of equilibrium. It requires an incredible amount of both randomization and specificity with our memory of different spots, different board textures, different hands, different range constructions. So because of that limitation, nobody can memorize all of these solvers. So
it's impossible to completely emulate a solver.
It's literally impossible. And people will come. That's why some of the, like, if you think about it, it's kind of funny. Some of the ways that online poker sites catch cheaters is they run hands against the solver and see who's over like a 96, 97% accuracy threshold, because we know that that's literally impossible for a human to do without assistance. So with this knowledge, we can understand where solvers are limited, but that doesn't mean that there's no information in them. That doesn't mean that there's no value from them. We can accept them for what they are. It's not a holy grail. It's not scripture. It's not the answer. It's not perfect, but it will give us some inclination, some hint, some nudge of where to look in a certain spot. A
map.
Exactly. It's like a map. One example that I can think of is, we open and the big blind defends and the flop is 9-8-5. It's like, we'll recognize that there are a lot of mixed strategies here, but there will be a few hands that are pure betting. Like an example might be ace-9 or pocket tens on this board that are betting at a massively higher frequency than everything else. Almost every other hand is mixing to some extent, in terms of checking sometimes or betting sometimes. But these couple hands are always betting. So that is an example of something where we can look at the solver and say, okay, clearly there is a strong reason for this. What is this? It's like, well, they have a lot of incentive to deny equity, and they are better than our opponent's hand on average. Whereas other hands have less of one of the two things and lead to less betting. So what we're doing with our solvers is using them as if it's like a foreign language, and we're being the Rosetta Stone to kind of interpret or translate it into something that makes sense strategically rather than emulate it.
Yeah, Alex, can you just also touch upon the fact that with a solver, we are not maximizing win rate, right? That's not what it's focusing on.
Oh, it's trying to break even.
Yes.
It's
and
the goal is to break even.
Yeah. And another big issue with them is like a good model. If you were trying to model, anything, you make a small change in the input and you get a small change in the output. But with solvers, so did I click twice or did someone else click? But a bad model, which is what all poker solvers are, is you slightly adjust one number. Yeah. Someone's not check raising enough or someone's not three betting enough. And it just throws a haywire on everything. And that's one of the biggest reasons that we should be using our brains to be like, okay, my opponent's not doing this enough, so I do this.
Yep.
Yeah. 100%.
Our brains are solvers too.
So solvers are just very hyper fickle. And we just broke that down where a tiny change can totally flip your strategy. And that's honestly like just telling why it's not a good representation as to how we can be playing. And people will probably be like, what about node locking? Well, node locking, one, it's almost never going to be extremely accurate, because at the end of the day, like one of the things that we mentioned before is in a poker hand, you're trying to decode what's best. You're trying to think it through because you don't actually know how your opponent plays a hand. And so when people tell me they played a hand a certain way, and I was like, well, I could create a scenario where that would be good.
Yeah.
If you could easily and always create a scenario to justify your play. And that's what a lot of people will actually use solvers to do, is they're like, well, I called this river, I ran it through the solver, and it wasn't quite good enough, so I adjusted my opponent's range, and now it fits.
Yeah. It didn't like the call, so I added a few more bluffs, and what do you know? Once I add enough bluffs, it becomes a good call. It's like, this is why I refer to GTO Wizard as GTO Soother, because oftentimes what it's doing is telling you like, oh yeah, you can do what you did 6% of the time. And it's like, oh, see, I did a low frequency play here, but it was approved.
I've never heard you call it that. I love that.
Oh, he makes fun of me all the time. And I am guilty of that, because I'll come home from a tournament, feel pretty bad about a hand that I played, put it into GTO Wizard, and I can definitely prove that it's okay. Yeah. And then it makes me feel a little bit better. One thing I wanted to mention here too is I think that, the pre-flop solvers, being used for pre-flop is going to be a lot better than, you know, later nodes in a hand.
Hold on,
because
let me quiet it down.
Yeah, sorry about that. We just had the doorbell ring here. But you know, I see people asking about charts and pre-flop. And pre-flop, it actually makes the most sense because there's no added information, right, to node logic. If it folds to us on the button and we have 8 big blinds, it makes sense to have a pretty set strategy here. But all of a sudden, if we're post-flop, 40 big blinds deep, and, you know, we're on the turn and somebody check raised the flop, we're in a completely different spot. And, you know, there's a lot of different information nodes to take into consideration.
Yeah, and that's when there are some benefits, right? Like understanding what it's thinking and why it's doing what it's doing. And we'll get more into that like 2 slides from now. So
awesome.
It does have some very nice benefits to knowing some of the aspects.
Yeah.
So perfect inputs are impossible. First off, tight pre-flop play. Some players might play tight pre-flop, but then c-bet too much. Okay, well, in reality, if that's the case, we want to check raise more c-bets, even though they're tight, but also fold a little bit more pre-flop. You know, so there's all of these, every single thing will have an adjustment. So if you just look at a solver and say, okay, well, it wants to 3-bet this hand here, like every time, or, you know, a high frequency. But then the player's opening tighter. If you were to adjust that, would it actually make the 3-bet? Probably not. And so that's one of the biggest reasons, you know, I'm just such a big advocate of like, what is my opponent doing too much of? Well, they're opening too much. So I want to find wider continues pre-flop, more 3-bets, etc. Well, they're c-betting too much. I want to find more flop floats out of position, in position, more raises post-flop. They're folding to too many c-bets. So I'm going to find a lot more small c-bets than a solver would recommend.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that this goes back to the node locking you mentioned before. Is something that I wanted to touch on but this slide does it perfectly, which is that not only are perfect inputs impossible, but even if they were possible to perfectly understand the inputs and then say, oh, I'm going to node lock for this spot. Well, now look at what you just did. We already discussed how impossible it is to remember all of the different outputs from a solver. Well, now you're adding an infinite number of iterations to the outputs that were already impossible to memorize. Because now you're going to memorize how to play against this player type under all of these different circumstances on all of these different boards and all of these different spots. And it just, the impossibility of this just highlights the importance of being able to think in a framework and think with, and I think, like I've mentioned before briefly, and I'll get into it more later, but thinking from a spectral perspective or thinking of things in spectrums will be extremely helpful on this. And this kind of pyramid or funnel that exists like this does happen in many hands. It's like, we you know, our opponent is too tight pre-flop. Well, now we need to, you know, tighten our defend range a little bit. And maybe they c-bet the flop too infrequently. Well, now we need to call a little bit less because some of the bluffs didn't bet. So now they get on the turn and all of a sudden their turn range is stronger than it should have been because their pre-flop range is too tight, their flop, and then, you know, we see this play out throughout a hand and they might land on the river without any bluff combos available because all of the hands that would be bluffs didn't bet at some point in the hand. But this isn't, but not everyone's play is extremely consistent and logical like this. That's the other thing that's really important to note with the kind of the drawback of solvers or focusing on their outputs too much, because not the whole reason, you know, what a solver will do with a node lock is basically say, how could I play optimally given these inputs? It's like, but that's not what's happening in game. The guy who only opens 10% of hands on the button isn't then playing a perfect post-flop strategy predicated on a 10% open range. But that's what a solver would do if you fed it that. So it's just giving you completely incorrect answers in a lot of these spots when you begin to node lock, because what's happening is they're playing a 10% open range. And in reality, what they should do in theory, if they needed to input a 10% open range, is play hyper aggressive on all of the boards that are now like slightly high. But what's going to happen in reality is this player who's playing a 10% open range is doing so because they're a passive, tight poker player in general. That's their approach to the game. So it's not like their strategy is going to be, okay, I'm going to open really tight and then I'm just going to go nuts every time post flop. That's very rarely going to be the case, but that's what a solver would probably suggest that you should do. So if you're looking at like a node lock and that, you're just going to be completely misled.
Yeah. And I was doing like some solver work, trying to prepare for last year's like Triton Bahamas. And one of the takeaways for me was that the bluffs that, and you had kind of spoke about this earlier, Alex, like the bluffs that people need to find on the river, they had to have continued within an earlier street.
Yeah.
And so when you start discounting or even removing certain pieces of an opponent's range because they are too tight pre-flop or on the flop, etc., then they just don't land on rivers with bluffs. And, I'll also mention while we're here that like the bet node, and when humans take it, is the most underbluffed node in poker. And so like this is one of the things that learn from our experience, right? We've played so much poker that we're able to tell you like, they're probably not going to have nearly enough bluffs there because they didn't start bluffing with pocket fours on ace, king, queen when they raised to middle position. Mm-hmm. Therefore, if they didn't bet the turn with that hand, they don't have any bluffs on the river.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. That funnel effect of how, overfolding can be so valuable in a lot of these spots, even though it might seem, like you're getting pushed around or whatever. But we need to recognize that the node that we are currently in might be extremely infrequent and unlikely. And therefore, the only option might be to just give up or to just fold.
And this is why I think post-flop, studying solver outputs is probably just really ineffective and not time efficient at all. You're way better off to try to learn how to think about these spots from a standpoint where you can apply it to all different hands, right? Instead of focusing in on one spot, trying to memorize, who knows what, and then trying to be in a hand in the future, and then try to recall what did you learn about that spot. And I just think it's just very inefficient.
Yeah, absolutely. So real world application, how do we apply this to our games? Well, in a perfect world, solvers would be extremely useful. But in reality, it's kind of just a baseline that we should use and understand why it's doing different things. Why is it betting bottom set a larger sizing? Well, because it's more likely that our opponent has the top pair to continue and pay us off. Why is it doing the different things it's doing? Why is it betting small in these textures? Well, it wants to target the auto folds in our opponent's range. And then you can start applying it to other textures. And that way, if you get something that's a little bit different than what you've studied, then you're able to actually use the information instead of regurgitating the memorized item.
Yeah.
Yeah. So whenever I'm looking at a solver, I'm always looking for those fringe cases of like, wait, this is doing something that I really don't like, that I wouldn't intuitively think to do. And then the question that I'm asking, I'm not saying, oh, I need to start doing that. That's never what happens. I'm saying this isn't something that I do. Why might it be doing that? And does that make sense? Or what circumstances would make that make sense? And I think that when we need to see this. Playing GTO is like a deferral. What you're really saying is that I don't know of a better way to play against you. So therefore I'm going to default to this very, very, defensive strategy.
And I think this sums up all of the solver talk really efficiently. And this is actually one of our favorite graphics in the entire world right now. And you have the drooler, the dumb person on the left saying, well, he bet big, so I fold. Then you have the genius that's like, well, he bet big, so I fold. And then in the middle, it's the person who's trying to regurgitate the solver info. I have blockers, and my hand is supposed to be a bluff catcher in theory, and I need to protect my river calling range. Well, it's like, not if when they bet big, they have no bluffs, or not enough bluffs to make it a really profitable call, right? And when you really think about that in the middle, let's just say someone bets pot on the river, and we're getting 2-1. That means that we would have to be right 1/3 of the time to break even. And so when we talked about before all of the missing bluff combos because people miss them earlier and like in the hand, then it is as simple as he bet big, I fold. Because he doesn't have 1/3 bluff combos in their range.
Yes, that's me.
Alex likes to say that I'm on the left and he's on the right.
I like to think of my poker journey as I started on the left, and then I did go to that middle spot, and now I'm trying to, be on the right. But
yeah,
but I will say that
in the middle.
Yes, I will say that it's funny because at the point of my poker career where I made a conscious effort of, okay, I'm going to get better at poker. I hired a GTO theory coach guy, and that's what we were focused on. And then my win rate and my profit graph just started going down, and it was like, what's happening? I'm supposed to be getting better, right? And it's like all of a sudden, all of the things that I was doing that made a lot of sense in the games that I was playing, exploiting population tendencies, I wasn't doing any longer because I was trying to play this balanced strategy. And I think that this is a very common thing we're seeing these days.
And the thing that's so funny about it all is like when you start off with this very logic, like this strategy that's rooted in logic, you don't often do things that don't make sense. You'll do whereas then you start to implement a theoretical equilibrium or a GTO strategy, and what you'll find is a lot of the pieces of the range or a lot of the actions are designed not necessarily with the specific hand in mind, but with the entire range and the what will be the max EV of millions of different iterations of this hand based on how I play all pieces of my range. So it's trying to create a profitable way to play a range rather than play an individual hand, which is great in theory. However, if we have opponent tendency, first of all, you're never going to be perfectly replicating that. So you'll instantly be leaking EV in that sense because you'll be trying to replicate something that you can't, and you'll no longer be doing the things that was actually prior to that was making up for your lack of like GTO knowledge. You were maybe doing making X decision under the understanding that your opponent won't do Y or that they don't do Y enough. Whereas now you're just like throwing all of your knowledge out the window and being like, I'm going to try to replicate this, but you're failing at doing that anyway.
It's the perfect example, I think, is how many bad calls have I made? How many bad river calls have I made because I justify it with, I have the top of my range, I have really good blockers, all of these concepts that GTO teaches you. And I think, the poker player I was 15 years ago would have been able to just realize this guy's not bluffing here. And then all of a sudden, as I gained all this knowledge about, what combos do I want to call with and all of, that sort of information, I've made so many bad river calls because of these theories. And that's one thing I wish I could unlearn sometimes.
And sometimes I get hung up on it. Like I talked about that zoomed in thing, where sometimes I get too zoomed in of like, well, this is the best hand I can have here. Like I have to.
Yep.
But it's
exactly.
Like, wait, it's not really a thing.
Well, and then you can come back to, this is why one of the things that we focused on in some of our training sessions is like, let's just look at the odds that we're getting. Are they bluffing enough? We don't necessarily need to worry about minimum defense threshold and how often we're calling and being potentially exploitable, because let's face it, even if we are, most people aren't going to recognize that. And even if they do, most people aren't going to know what to do in response to that, which is kind of what, Jonathan was alluding to with this question is like, if people know that you're overfolding the river, they still just like won't do anything about it for the most part. But more importantly, they won't have the sample size to confidently say this anyway, especially as a tournament poker player. If you're playing a 6-handed cash game with the same 5 people for 1 million hands, we're going to be in a little bit of a different scenario.
Very different.
But yeah.
So Cliffs, don't put too much weight into solvers. Don't waste all your time studying. But okay, what do we do to study? Well, it's skipping aside. So how do we study poker? Well, again, we're going to start with how not to study. We're not going to mindlessly grind solvers. Spending hours studying exact solver outputs for every scenario without understanding the underlying strategic principles or logic. And that was like one of the things I mentioned is like, why is the solver betting big here? Why is it betting small here? And then we can start to apply it to other situations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's not just looking at it and saying, why is it betting big? And then being like, okay, I understand why it's betting big, and now I bet big there too. No, it's looking at it and saying, why is it betting big? Okay, because our opponent is doing this. So now we're in a situation where it's betting big to deny equity from like one example would be the Queen 8-5 rainbow. The solver bets big a lot. because it's very unlikely that the big blind defend range has nothing. Our opponent has a lot of marginal continues in this spot. So therefore, the solver likes to bet big to prevent them from having very profitable calls with all of those hands.
Yeah, gut shots, 5x.
But now we're in a situation where we're playing against an opponent who mindlessly folds 9-7 on the queen 8-5. They don't even think about it. They think I missed. Oh, I'm not going to call it to try to hit a gut shot. Those never come. You're playing against that opponent. What's the point in betting big now with your bluffs? There's really no benefit to it anymore. However, on the flip side, the benefit of betting big with your value hands is significant there because we know their marginal continues are folding anyway. So therefore, we don't get any money from them, whatever size we bet. But when we bet big, if they have something, they will probably call. Yeah. And this might sound to the solver-based mind, it might hurt your head a lot, and it still does to me to some extent because it's like, wait, but if I just bet big with my value hands and small with my bluffs, that's really easy to play against. It's like, just remind yourself, we're not revealing our strategy to our opponent. And that's and this strategy would only be one that we would take against an opponent that will be very unlikely to recognize it.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. And even if you did, or they caught on to that, it still takes a lot for people to actually adjust. People don't know how to adjust to what you're doing sometimes, right?
Yeah, and I think
sometimes on these boards, I'll be in spots where I'll bet small against like a fishy player at the table. And I'm playing with a bunch of super high stakes players. And I can feel that moment of being like, wait, what? Why'd he bet small? Like, I know that he knows that that's not a thing. That's not the right. That's not what you're never supposed to bet this size. It's like, well, yeah, I know all you guys know that. And I wouldn't do this against you. But I'm playing against someone else right now, and I think that this is going to be the best way to play my range here.
Yeah.
And that's something that it's kind of like a dualistic approach to the game that's very difficult to simultaneously hold both perspectives and both approaches. But it's very important to be able, in the pursuit of maximizing our win rate, to be able to understand the why and know why not at the same time.
Yeah. So we also talked about a little bit before about like passive content consumption. Watching endless hours of training or even just like YouTube videos of like Rampage or Wolfgang without taking notes. Like one of the first things we said when this started was take notes. How many of you actually did it? Feel free to respond in the chat. Or thinking about where the things we discussed apply to your game. Where did you hear something where you're like, wow, I'm probably betting too big of a size somewhere. I'm probably calling too many rivers because I have a good bluff catcher. Like these are the type of takeaways you need to have when you're doing learning. You can't just passively absorb all the content and think you're going to get better. You have to constantly think about how it applies to you. Like when I'm studying poker or business or relationship stuff with my wife or how to be a better dad, I'm constantly thinking of how can I apply that to my life? How can I better myself with this information?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And
studying
I think
alone, did you have something to say, Alex?
No, go on. I was going to go to studying alone, but I'll let you start it off.
Yeah, I think studying alone is one of the biggest leaks that people can have. Like refusing to collaborate with others who might have a different perspective. I played a hand during the 50K or 100K this summer. And it doesn't matter what the buy-in size. But I 3-bet and then punted it off. And I was like, this has to be good. But I wasn't sure. So I texted Alex. And I was just looking. I actually texted Alex because I was looking for confirmation that I made a good blast off. And the first thing Alex said was like, I don't think your hand's good enough to ever bet the turn. And I bet turn and river, right? So like having that other perspective is so important.
Yeah.
And I think that that's some of people's biggest leaks and one of the biggest benefits of community, right? Like whether it's the chip leader coaching community or whatever you guys find, you have your friends that you play around town with, getting those unique perspectives and not just the perspectives of people who think like you do. You don't want people who are just going to like make you feel better. You want people who are actually going to help you improve.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that's criticizing you and telling you where you're wrong. And like, it's not, coddling you. It's telling you like, oh no, I think this is a big mistake. And like, you don't need to say it with harsh words or anything like that. But you want to surround yourself with a group of people who don't really care about your feelings. They value truth and honesty and authenticity over, comfort and being nice. And I think that the studying alone, what this can do is bring you to these places where you're, reinforcing your own decisions with potentially circular logic or caught up in a certain thought process, and it's like it's kind of a manifestation or a representation of the Dunning-Kruger effect to an extent, because you're preventing yourself from becoming aware of the things that you don't know or the inconsistencies in your thought process. And this really just limits your growth and limits your ability to learn significantly. So like, this is part of why my approach to poker has always been to be very curious about the weaker players. Like I don't discount anyone's opinion. I know a lot of people who will, they'll be talking about a hand and they'll go right to the person that they think is the best player and be like, what do you think about this hand? And then whatever they say, they're like, okay, good. That's the answer. But I'm always curious, like, why did this guy who I think is a fish just like, bet this size on the turn? Or why did he check back this hand? Because I want to understand the way that he thinks, because that informs my correct decision-making process. The same thing goes with studying alone. You're preventing yourself from being exposed to a number of different perspectives that may potentially open the door to a deeper level of understanding.
Yeah. Another pitfall, I think, is when people get input from non-experts. And there's a lot of great poker coaches out there. I'm not saying you have to learn from us. Obviously, I do believe for no limit tournaments, our stuff is the best. But just don't watch content creators and think that this is how I learn at poker. First of all, it's going to be passive content consumption. You don't want to apply those things to your game most of the time. And more importantly, like getting coaching from mediocre poker players is going to be a big mistake. Like you want to make sure that you're learning from people who have been through the stakes that you play, who succeeded at those levels and have the ability to convey their thoughts in a way that you can understand.
Yeah, I think this is true for everything in life, but find the person who's, already done or succeeded at the goal that you have. And then, let's see what they're doing. And as Chance, you said, like learn from our mistakes, learn from our, hours and years of knowledge that, we're sharing with you guys.
Yeah, like just little things like that I said earlier, like the bet. If someone bets the double barrels the turn and triple barrels the river, like I'm sitting here and I'm telling you, you don't have to pay off that river multiple times like I have, or, hundreds of times like I have, to know that it's like, okay, this is just a bad call. Like unless you have a really good hand or the perfect bluff catcher, right? Like, in general, you should be finding the quote unquote hero fold in those spots, but not because it's a hero fold, because you don't beat their range and you're not getting the right price. But there's tons of spots like that. That's just the one that we've spoken of so far. But that's where the benefits come from. You can learn from our mistakes, like Chrissy said. I think that was really well put.
Yeah. Take away from our experience, away from our, knowledge that we've gained by living it. And that's where, working with other people, whether it, and this can be people who, are just like in your circle. But taking away from other people's things that they've gone through and having to not have to make the same mistakes your friends have or your coaches have or whatever is going to be a shortcut to getting better.
Yeah. Awesome. So that brings us to how to study poker. This is something that I got fortunate to do right away in my career. I started using Poker Tracker. I played online when I first started, and I marked interesting hands. Whenever I was in a situation where I just didn't know what the right answer was, I was like, all right, I'm gonna go look at this later. I didn't think about it too much then because I was playing a lot of tables, but it helped remove it from my brain and allow me to continue to focus.
Yeah, and then the group study, like we've mentioned so much so far, reviewing hands to get that different perspective. We want to look at things from every different angle. There's plenty of tricks on our perception that can be made, and we can use any number of analogies. But certain things will look away from one spot. If you think about like a piece of paper, there's a certain perspective where you wouldn't even really be able to see it because it's plane in that dimension is so limited. But then you see it from another side, and there might be like a beautiful drawing on it or something like that. Whereas from a different angle, it looked like it literally wasn't even there. So different perspective gain is the best way to like see something for what it is.
Yeah. The people, our CLC members that are in the chat, I'm repeating myself for you guys, but when we say mark interesting hands, often we end up marking big hands, big river decisions, big river preflop call, or sorry, big preflop decisions for big pots. And I always say, try to find those little tiny spots that you're like, it folded to me in the small blind and I had Jack 6 offsuit. 30 big blinds. What should I do? Those are the spots that maybe they don't seem as interesting as, a big, overbet pot sized river decision. But I think that all of these small little spots that you just have a tiny bit of like, I wonder what's best here. What should I do here? I'm not sure if I'm playing this spot. And typically it's these little tiny spots that we play, every orbit, how you play your small blind, how you play your big blind. So I just want to stress that so much that it doesn't have to be like the big decisions. Actually, the small ones are going to really make a difference in your win rate. And, especially in fields where you're playing versus weak players, this is the opportunity to exploit them and make money. So I think that, trying to see, I ask Alex all the time here about, blind on blind situations or tiny little spots that I think some people don't even see as interesting. But once you realize these spots actually make a huge difference, you'll start to look for them more.
And remember, the interesting hands are like, this is just basically a reiteration of what Chrissy just said, but there is one emphasis point that I want to say. It's not going to be the 200 big blind pot in a 4-bet pot, because that's actually probably not going to be that interesting or even that relevant to your win rate because of the frequency of its occurrence. And that's why we spend so much time focusing on well, for one, building logical frameworks, to get back to this slide, because from a logical framework, we are deriving all of our decision-making processes for all of our different spots. So if we build a sound framework, we can apply it to everything. Whereas if we just look at like, oh, this is a 4-bet pot and I got to the river with second pair, like looks like it's a profitable call based on this solver. It's like that doesn't really have much, even if you know that and you memorize exactly what you're supposed to do on the river in that 4-bet pot. Like, how many times is that going to happen again in your life?
Yeah.
A couple, maybe. And look at the EV as the decision, like what would you have done and what will you do now that you have all this extra knowledge? Is it that different? Probably not. But if you're constantly betting too big on a certain flop, or not raising the button enough, or not raising out of the small blind enough, or not defending the big blind enough, these smaller EV losses that aren't as interesting or don't appear as significant are going to add up significantly.
They're huge. I mean, even just like, are you too tight in the cutoff? As you said, are you not raising the button enough? These are the spots that...
Well, it's funny you say that, because identifying blind spots is one of the biggest aspects, because at the end of the day, we don't know what we don't know.
Yep.
Right. And not to mention, you get too zoomed in. You don't have the ability to learn from others' strengths. It's just identifying blind spots is one of the biggest importances of coaching.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think poker is very interesting in that it's like a constant like trap of becoming myopic and like focusing on one thing instead of seeing the forest, for lack of a better phrase. So that is why community and coaching has such an importance to identify these blind spots. And if you're playing in you have some home game, it's like, well, your group of friends from the home game might not really see all those blind spots. Then that's the importance of expert opinion and kind of bringing us to the advanced strategic insights, the different ways to think through these spots, because we've spent millions of hours, or maybe not millions of hours, thousands of hours, tens of thousands of hours, maybe hundreds of thousands of hours.
Many.
Discussing and thinking about how to approach these different spots, given what our perception of the situation might be. And all of this, I think, serves to really accelerate that learning curve, because it's forcing you to see the things that you might have been keeping hidden aside and not really look at or address for the majority of the time that you've been playing the game.
Yeah. Cool. And then the accountability and motivation that really comes with it, I think, is one of the most helpful. You see others around you succeeding. You see others around you playing their best and trying to improve. And it's just, you gain that by osmosis almost. You're like, well, I can't just be here and not study and not be motivated. Like, it is motivating. It helps you do everything more.
For sure.
All right, so next up, the max exploit system, which is obviously one of our favorite topics. Step one, I would say, is, well, we're not going to do steps yet. Opponent analysis, identifying exploitable patterns in your opponent's play styles. And I think this is going to be easy for everyone, like seeing that someone's betting every single flop or raising a ton pre-flop, 3-betting way too much, right? And then modifying our approach to counter the specific player weakness. And I also want to clarify, if you notice a pattern in an opponent, it's not necessarily a weakness. It's just something that you can exploit. Someone might be doing something a ton because it's working, but that doesn't mean you can't exploit them if they're exploiting the rest of the table.
Yeah. Like good decisions by our opponents might be exploitable, just like how we discussed that some of these spots, maybe c-betting big with strong hands and small with weak hands, is actually the optimal strategy from the perspective of EV. It's hyper exploitable if anyone figured out what you're doing. So there's a big gap between what is exploitable and what is profitable. Exploitable doesn't inherently mean not profitable. And I think that's an important thing to accept. With anyone coming from the theoretical background or coming from the perspective of a solver might have a hard time kind of like truly accepting that. But that is the reality of the situation. And I think that it's becoming more and more prevalent at higher stakes. People making these adaptations in a way that they're like, okay, I'm willing to be exploitable here because I'm responding to this specific situation. And I'm not going to always do this same thing. So therefore it's not really exploitable.
Yeah. And we're going to dive into all this a lot more. Just so we move on. What are exploits? They're intentional deviations from a balanced play style that targets specific weaknesses or imbalances in our opponent's strategies to maximize our EV, or expected value. And then how do we exploit? Well, first we have to notice that people are doing something too much or too little. Noticing that someone always tank folds the turn. They're probably overfolding the turn. We should probably double barrel them. So you have to pay attention, and it's a lot easier to pay attention when you're off your phone. I think that writing down the tendencies and building out kind of like a profile for each person really gives you this like A, B, C. Okay, I'm paying attention. I noticed that they're doing this. Okay, well, how do I beat that? That's kind of like the next step.
Yeah, there's a few examples that come quickly to mind, but I think that if anyone's wondering, simple ones that probably in lower stakes that I think are common is just, you notice that somebody, maybe they don't value bet the river with 2-pair in a spot where you would always value bet 2-pair. So all of a sudden, okay, their river bluffs are very polar if they do have a bluffing range, but and then when you see something like that, making sure you're writing it down, like things that stand out, right? People are overfolding their blinds, right? You just notice like, wow, this guy has folded his big blind, 4 out of 5 orbits when the button opened. Okay, cool. I'm not going to look at my cards when I'm on the button. I'm just going to keep opening.
Yeah, sometimes people show hands when they fold the big blind to an open. And I think to myself, I'm like, you should probably have called that one. And it's like, well, I'm going to raise that player's big blind a lot, right?
Oh, yeah.
Notice
you have the guy show like
a game plan.
You have the guy show like the 6-4 suited, and he's like,
sorry. The point I actually wanted to make by that is this is why it's so important to pay attention even when you're not in the hand. And I guarantee you somebody in the chat isn't doing this because I see this all the time that people aren't watching the hands that they're not in. They fold their hand and they pull out their cell phone. So you need to pay attention, and this is how you get the information that's going to win you the money from these exploits. And this is also going back to the issue with solvers is, a solver might tell you to fold, 10-6 offsuit on the button when it folds to you, but it doesn't realize that the big blind and small blind are both super nits who are overfolding.
And it's also telling you to fold that because if you told your opponent that you were opening that hand and they were smart and able to perfectly respond to your opening this hand, they would just be able to 3-bet profitably without looking at their cards. So it's creating this like reflexive nature to your strategy that isn't necessarily existing in reality. But one of the things that I saw mentioned in the chat earlier that I really wanted to address briefly while we're on this slide is, somebody said, don't you need to know GTO? Don't we need to know baseline in order to know how to deviate? And The answer is somewhat complex, but I think in short, the answer is no. For one, the answer is no, because nobody knows exactly what baseline is. We need to have an idea of what like general principles are and what ranges maybe are supposed to look like. But it doesn't mean that our level of precision in terms of like knowing exactly what everything is supposed to be like is required in order to exploit. Like you can show me an ace when you fold versus a button min raise. And I don't need to know anything about what an appropriate open range from the button is to be able to tell you to raise more. Like just raise more than whatever it was that you were doing. Raise more.
Probably raise pure because that's such an extreme.
Exactly. Yeah. You maybe just raised without looking. Like you don't even need to look.
Also, one thing I wanted to add is I actually think that, using solvers or understanding baselines in certain spots and getting more in depth in your game, I see that almost like, the attic, the upper part of the house. We need to get the
cherry on top.
Yes, it's the cherry on top. We need to get the fundamentals and the foundation down really solid first. So that's the other side to it too, right? Like I almost look at, especially post flop, using solvers is for more advanced players. Like you need to really get that foundation right. Like, crush the 500s, crush the 1Ks. And then if you want to start looking at post flop solver outputs, go for it. As you're moving up stakes.
It just represents such a small percentage of your EV. Like what EV gain do you get by nailing that river, bet frequency exactly? Yeah. Well, maybe you gain an extra 0.25% of a big blind, like you gain 0.1 big blinds per 100 or 0.01 big blind per 100 by hitting this spot perfectly. Well, okay, now if we know that our opponent is way too tight and we just fold all of our bluff catchers on the river, we might gain 50 big blinds per 100 against this player.
Yeah.
Like the gap between the EV gained by making different adjustments is so significant that GTO just pales in comparison to playing logically sound poker.
And one of the things we always say is that like a well thought out decision for a logical reason is going to, even when you're wrong some percentage of the time, is going to outperform a GTO strategy.
Yes.
So like what are the 3 stages of information gathering? Well, in live poker, there's profiling. I can't tell you how many times people have sent me a hand and they're like, all right, well, I got moved to a new table, so the player's completely unknown. And I'm like, okay, are they a 21-year-old guy or a 70-year-old lady? Like, give me something. Like, how are their chips stacked? How are they dressed? Like, there's information, right?
Yeah.
And then we have these data points. They got to showdown. They showed a fold. That pot on the flop, right? There's all of these situations where you have some information, and then you start to compile those pieces of data to complete your player profile. And like we mentioned before, build a game plan against them. And I mentioned, since I did mention, if someone's betting really big on the flop, well, you probably shouldn't defend the king 3-0 because you're going to flop a 3 and then all of a sudden you're going to get faced with a pot size bet and you just have to fold, right? So like knowing that everything you see has an answer to it. It's like, okay, so based on what my opponent does, whether it's under bluffing the river, which is a very common low to mid stakes player tendency, well, I'm just not going to hero call the river. Like I've actually told myself that I could just blindly fold rivers, and this is probably an exaggeration, but just blindly fold rivers to big bets, and it would be better than trying to make any hero calls.
Yep.
Yeah, and then the other thing that we can do is implement that into our strategy in reverse. It's like, okay, I know my opponent never bluffs the river, so therefore I can actually expand my turn calling range because I know that my equity realization against bluffs will be 100% if he never bluffs the river. So we can capture all of that EV by making a decision on a prior street that would be different. And this is the most important thing about making these types of exploits is that we don't need a complete and perfect player profile. We don't need 10 hours of play with this person. We need one showdown, the way their hat is, what the shirt says. Like sometimes these things can be enough to be like, okay,
Alex Foxon wears a shirt that says "Do not obey." Do you think someone wearing a shirt that says "Do not obey" is playing tight? There's always information.
There's information everywhere, and I think that some of it, obviously some can be misleading, but we're working in a probabilistic game. So we don't need certainty in order to act. We just need to believe that it's more likely to be one thing than the other, and that weighs us in a certain direction. So that's why your confidence in this framework from a mindset perspective to be like, okay, I think this is this, therefore I'm making this decision, instead of being like, well, I think he's under bluffing, but I have too good of a hand, so I call. And it's like, well, you're leaking chips this way, instead of just having confidence in your perception of the situation and being like, yeah, this guy is wearing a golf shirt and he's, in his 70s and hasn't played a hand in an hour. And I got to the river with top pair and a blocker to the nut flush, but I don't think he's bluffing. So I'm just going to fold, even though I know this is a clear call in theory.
And I think the beauty of this outlook is actually that we are focusing on our player and, what we think they have, what we think they're doing, their patterns, their approach to the game, instead of focusing so much on our hand and what we're supposed to do with our hand and range. And I feel like that's the logic and framework that, using a GTO wizard, for example, especially post flop, is teaching you. It's thinking about what's your hand, what do I want to do? But we are going to do way better when we actually take into consideration what our opponent is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So before we just rattle off the answers to these, of how to exploit these items, think to yourself, look at them and say, well, what would I do? What should my reaction be to these? Right? So narrow 3-betting range, weak big blind defense, read all of these to yourself and think about the answers before we rattle them off. And I'll start with narrow 3-bet ranges. Well, I'm not going to take those quote unquote GTO standard shoves with small pairs and ace-x suited because they just don't have enough bluffs.
Oh, you're not going to 4-bet shove ace-5 suited?
Well, if it's very early in a tournament and stacks are deep, I'm going to be more inclined to call 3-bets because they probably have strong hands that can pay me if I make a good one.
Yeah, your implied odds go way up when you're against a narrow 3-bet range. Your equity versus the range goes down, but your implied odds go up. So stack size becomes extremely relevant against this type of narrow 3-betting range. And you might see if I'm 300 big blinds deep and some old man 3-bets me and I happen to have opened 8-4 suited, there's a really good chance that I'm peeling there because first of all, I know I can max extract if I ever have something that's better than Queens plus. And I also know that I can probably get him to fold those hands on other scary boards where I don't improve.
Or more importantly, if it comes 8-3 deuce or 4 deuce deuce and you flop a pair and you check call one, you're very comfortable just folding on the turn if they bet again, right? So the equity realization is much more clear.
Yes.
You're not worried about, okay, he's going to take ace king and just rip me a new one. I think that was a quote from what someone said earlier about an 80-year-old man in Choctaw. But, you don't have to worry about those things. So just kind of understanding the clarity that your hand might have against a weaker player.
Exactly, because their range is so defined that it becomes very easy to play against. Whereas, if you're playing against a player who 3-bets a lot, it's harder to defend against because they could have a huge range of hands.
Yeah. So what about someone who defends the big blind weakly? Well, the first thing I would think of is I probably want to raise their big blind a lot more. I'm probably going to increase my flop c-betting somewhat significantly. Maybe even my turn a lot if they don't have a lot of combos that are top pair heavy. But then on the river, I'm really going to tighten up because by the time they get there, they're just going to have strong top pairs.
Yeah,
or better. And I'm going to 3-bet your opens on when this guy's in the big blind every single time.
And we don't make money. We'll get into this on the stack builder portion, day 2 or 3. But we're not making money in poker by trying to get people to fold top pair. I will just tell y'all right now, that is not where it's at. It's about getting them to fold their equity, to fold their low strength, medium strength hands. But when they got top pair, guys, let's let them have it.
Yeah, it's
agreed.
What we're doing primarily is getting people to fold 28% equity when they're getting 4-1. That's where a huge percent of our EV is coming from. Getting them to under-realize their equity, getting them to see the river too infrequently, getting them to fold out better hands, and then also simultaneously forcing them to overplay some of their marginal value hands because they don't know, they feel they're getting bullied and they don't know how to respond. This is a very common thing that's happening in these spots.
Yeah.
So what if someone has... Go ahead.
The insufficient defense for c-bets. This is a great one, and it's kind of what I was touching on before with the Queen 8-5 example. If our opponent isn't going to be check raising the flop enough, well, one natural response there, and this is something that you can confirm in a solver. If you don't allow a solver to check raise the flop, well, the c-bet frequency from the in-position player is going to go up drastically, because
I think it actually goes to 100
in a lot of spots. If like you no longer have a range advantage, maybe it doesn't.
Somewhat texture dependent.
Yeah. But usually it's just going to go straight to 100%. So we have an opponent that's not defending versus c-bets enough. Well, this is exactly the example I described before. I'm probably going to bet my strong hands a little bit bigger and bet my weak hands a little bit smaller, because I know there aren't those elastic hands that might fold to a big bet but call a small bet in their range. They either have calls or they have folds. And additionally, when we identify this weak defense versus c-bet, we can pretty comfortably say that they're not taking this insufficient or weak strategy and then like using it to their advantage. It's probably just a consistently weak strategy. So you don't need to say to yourself like, oh, well, I need to balance my range here. This is where GTO goes out the window. We know our opponent doesn't understand GTO. We know our opponent won't be able to exploit us for deviating. And we just do something that is rooted entirely in logic in this spot and say, I'm going to bet small with my weak hands and big with my strong hands, because it's like once they hit a certain threshold, they're calling. And once they're below that threshold, they're folding. They might not even know what the pot size is.
Yeah. And then another go ahead, Chrissy. Do you have something to add?
I think what I was going to add is, first of all, I think this is very common in low to mid stakes. This is probably the number one thing I see, that I like to feel like myself and, both of you do very well. And I think I see a lot of regs and fellow poker players missing these spots. And I would just say that, all of a sudden we don't even have to think about necessarily checking back a lot of hands, and you can kind of just like blindly bet flops and get them to fold equity in these spots, because they are. And as Alex said, small c-bets are very effective. So these aren't the types of players that we need to be afraid they're going to check raise us, off our equity, or that when they check raise that we have to worry that they're actually finding the check raise bluff on the paired board. They're just not doing that.
The next one is one of my favorites, actually. When someone's over c-betting and then when they check back and then like fold the river, right? So I think this is extremely common, where if we were to really look at this and think about what that means as like pieces of their range, that means when they have nothing, they c-bet the flop with nearly all of their nothing. And then on the turn, they're like, well, I have a shitty hand and they called, so now I'm going to check back again. And then on the river, they're like, well, they probably have a weak ace high or like something like that beat, so they fold the river. Okay, so how do we find our way to beat those? Well, we just call flop more. You call flop more, and when they check back the turn, you can bluff river or check if you've made like a pair, right? So there's plenty of boards like King 7 Deuce where you have like 8-9 suited with a backdoor flush draw, or Queen Jack O, where you can actually just check call the flop. And if they check back the turn, then you can just comfortably bluff the river. Yeah. Or if you make a weak pair, then you can bet small because now you're targeting ace high. But if you don't make a hand, you bet big to get ace high to fold, right? So that's probably one of my favorite exploits against weaker players, and attacking the imbalance in their range. Because at the end of the day, these are imbalances in ranges that we're taking advantage of.
Yeah, for sure. Somebody said in the chat, I just want to address it really quick, wouldn't betting small induce a call since it's a small bet? But what we're identifying is these players that aren't actually, maybe they don't even understand the fact of, pot size and pot odds and how much you bet. So it actually doesn't really matter. So we're identifying these players that aren't, playing correctly.
And what's important is being able to empathize with this thought process and understand it. And that's something why I've always taken a lot of interest in hearing the way weak players talk about the game. Because you'll see someone with like the 9-7 on the Queen 8-5. I'm going to keep using this example. And they'll fold because from their perspective, they're like, well, I'm out of position. What am I going to do? Just call and then like hope to hit a 6 on the turn. Like in their mind, that is the only way that they can win the hand, is if they turn a 6, because they know they're going to face another bet on the turn. And like, this is actually quite logical. they're only going to hit a 6 a little bit over 8% of the time, close to 9% of the time on the turn. So they're like, okay, 1 in 10 I win the hand. I'm not getting that. Even, like, they might not even be thinking on this like mathematical level, but they're like, it's 1 in 10 chance for me to win the hand. That's how they see it. And they're not considering like, oh, if I call and then he doesn't bet the turn, I could bluff the river, or maybe I should check raise because he's going to be c-betting a lot of weak hands that might fold that have me beat. And they're not seeing it from this perspective. So when you understand it from their perspective, if they're just folding this hand, the betting small won't induce calls because there's no marginal call. That's something that's really important to focus on against these types of players, is where is the marginal hands that they might continue with based on a one bet size or wouldn't versus another. So obviously they're always calling with the queen. So if we have kings here, we want to and this is where taking problems to their extremes is really, really valuable. If we let's make an imaginary opponent that only calls with a queen or better here. Okay, well, if we have pocket fives and they only call with a queen or better on queen 8-5, well, we ought to be betting huge because they're calling any size with that, or they're folding everything else. So why would you bet small? What are you gaining from doing that? Absolutely nothing. You're just leaving tons of money on the table. Now, that's not a realistic situation, but the reality will probably be a less extreme version of that.
Yeah. And I picture that like curve with the dumb guy, smart guy, and the mid guy.
Yeah.
And I picture me bet big because I have good hand. And the dumb guy, me bet big because I have good hand. The guy in the middle is like doing all this stuff.
No, you have to have a balanced range. You need to have checkbacks and, it's like.
All right. So there's also some major shifts based on the stage you're at, especially in these. Whoa, it's not showing the correct slide. Oh, it's out of order on the upload. No big deal. So the tendencies do shift at different tournament stages. So I'm sure that anyone here who's played a tournament have noticed that in early stages, people are willing to gamble. So maybe we're less inclined to do as much crazy stuff because people can rebuy. They're there to gamble early. You haven't really identified who the gamblers are, who the low hanging fruit that's just going to flop a pair and go broke. And then next up is the bubble, where people kind of over adjust. They play significantly tighter in their opening range, their big blind defense ranges. And honestly, they shove like way too tight in general. This continues to the final table, I think, where it's just even more so than the bubble, right? Like on the final table bubble and at the final table, the fear of busting is just so there.
Yeah, and I think that this is one of the things that we need to recognize is just another layer to our framework. And this is why solvers can be so detrimental, because they prevent us from thinking about these realistic things that have major impacts on the way our opponents perceive and respond to certain situations. So in the early stages, we might be playing against someone who's overcalling the river. So in these early stages, we probably don't want to bluff rivers as much. That same exact opponent at the final table probably massively overfolds the river. So we probably want to be bluffing a lot more there. And understanding that as our opponent's tendencies become less theoretically sound and further away from equilibrium and further away from logic, the more our reactions want to become more and more drastic. We want to And this goes back to the solver model of like small changes in inputs cause drastic shifts in outputs. If our opponent is overfolding the river by 10% of hands, the solver will tell you to bluff every possible hand that isn't value on the river.
And I also I accidentally skipped over post bubble. I can't even mention how many times I've seen people play way too tight to get into the money. Then they get in the money and they have 15 big blinds.
And they're just
just open jam the 9-7-0.
Yeah.
They're just over it, right? Yeah. Where people make these knowingly bad get-ins. So the early stage actually plays a little bit like the post stage, where you have the random explosions that you weren't really expecting. And the bubble and the final table also play similarly.
Yeah, definitely. I think that and identifying which players at your table are going to be more susceptible to major shifts in their strategy based on these tendencies or based on these different stages is going to be extremely important. And again, it just highlights the value of paying attention at the table. And this type of information that we've accumulated is not necessarily, it's something that is gained from experience and paying attention at the table. And this is why this is actually the reason why I began like staring at people in hands. And it's because I believe very strongly in our subconscious ability to absorb information. I think that, I mean, this is scientifically backed. Our conscious brain is aware of or absorbing or processing like I think it's one billionth or one millionth, something in that neighborhood of the data that our subconscious brain is. And this is why you have feelings and intuition. They're not necessarily emotionally rooted. Oftentimes they can be rooted in the aggregate of your subconscious, like your subconscious perception of what's happened throughout your whole life. So maybe there's something that you can't articulate why you feel that way. And maybe you don't even consciously know why it is, but you're somewhere in your brain is telling you to do something because you've seen situations similar to this before. And there's a deep subconscious pattern recognition that's happening. So give your subconscious brain the potential or the opportunity to absorb all this information by paying attention and not going on your phone in between every hand.
I'm going to follow up that Russell Crowe beautiful mind explanation with a quiz. Why are these in different orders? There we go. All right, so here's an example in a quiz for exploiting player tendencies. You've observed that an opponent has been defending their big blind at a normal frequency, but check folding versus c-bet at a very high frequency. How do you split your bet sizes against this player when he is defending his big blind? A, bet a theoretically correct size on every flop to balance your bluffs and value. B, bet big with value and small with bluffs. C, bet larger on flops and always barrel turns. We'll give you guys a second to reply. Oh, it's 2 hours, guys. We're gonna end it right here. No, we always seem to go long. We could talk about every single one of these slides for 2 hours, I think.
Yeah,
yes.
A couple of B's. I'm really surprised we only have 4 answers out of 123 people.
Yeah.
So, would you like to go through any of the answers, guys?
Well, I feel like I've gone through this exact one, like the whole time as my example.
We are getting a lot of correct answers this go around.
I think it's easy. If you start with C, wait, are we saying?
Well, B is going to be the correct answer.
Yeah, so B is right. And I think, C, I'm just going to say right away, this doesn't really make sense because if we're bluffing, we would want to bluff at, the cheapest price possible. And this guy is this opponent is telling us that,
if they don't hit, they're folded.
Exactly. So we don't need to bet large with our bluffs against this person. And we especially wouldn't want to barrel the turns if when they continue on the flop, we know they have a pretty good piece, right?
Yeah.
So that's an easy way to rule C out.
And then, C is probably close to the inverse of what we would actually want to do, because if our opponent, remember the funneling that we're going to do with our opponent's hands, if the flops, so if they're folding to c-bet at too high of a frequency, what this is basically saying is that funnel of hands is too small. They're only letting a few hands slip through to the turn. It's a very, very tight funnel. Therefore, our flop c-bet is narrowing their range significantly. So our turn bet frequency inherently wants to go down because we've captured the EV of folding out all of their weaker hands already on the flop, that our turn bluffs are now, from a proportionate standpoint, like way diminished in terms of their EV.
Yeah. And if you look at A, it's kind of what like the solver nerd punch in a clock people are doing the right thing. I'm betting this theoretically correct size. Well, yeah, they're making money, but they're not maximizing the amount of money that they can make.
Because they're losing more with their bluffs than they need to, and they're not winning as much with their value as they could. A simple, I think, board texture, again, I just want to say, I see some of the comments. Nuance does exist to all of this, of course, right? Like if the board is king 8-2 and we have ace king, yes, I would like to size large, but there's going to be some inflection point to where all of a sudden, the second pairs fold or maybe the third pairs. So I'm trying to find that perfect size that I still get action from, second pair.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but these are generalizations. But I think that's a really great example.
So learning and applying exploits isn't going to be like, okay, so I watched an hour portion on exploits and now I'm just going to go crush everybody. It doesn't work that way. You have to get in there and have trial and error. There's no substitute for actually getting in there and trying. And just like we talked about, you get in there, you see someone's doing something too much, like a lot or not much at all, and you try to figure out what the exploit is to that. And I'm lucky that I've been playing the game for a really long time, and I see something and I immediately know what the exploit is. That's one of the benefits of, having a coach or a community that you can ask. But you can logically get there on your own as well. We just highly recommend accelerating your learning, like we mentioned before. And the other interesting aspect is that learning the right lessons. Variance can reward incorrect adjustments and cause you to develop incorrect frameworks. And so when you think about what that means, it means like poker is like vicious in some ways. You can do something completely wrong and win and then think you're doing it right and then have the wrong lesson like ingrained into your brain.
Yeah, it's the same way that people get, you'll see the occasional, I'm sure everyone's seen this, the guy who just like somebody opens and they just go all in for like 60 big blinds or something. And they show the table aces and they're like, yeah, last time they got cracked. Want to make sure that doesn't happen again. And it's like, yeah. I'm sure that every single person, it's laughable, but every single person in this chat has probably seen that happen at least once in their life. And because it's a real thought that some people have, they're just coming from a purely fear-based perspective. And sure, that's an extreme example, but again, I like to think in extremes in order to find the incremental differences in things, because when we're making emotional responses to different things, whether it's like, we have this exploit, I think they're folding too much to c-bet, so therefore I'm going to bet small with my weak hands and big with my strong hands. Maybe that doesn't work the first couple of times you do it. Maybe, or maybe you're betting big and they just keep folding. And your brain isn't necessarily remembering that if you bet small, they were going to fold anyway. So then you start to think like, this big bet isn't working. They're never calling. I'm not getting any value. I'm going to try betting smaller. And then you bet smaller and then they actually have something and you're like, oh, see, it works. So like the circumstantial aspects of it can actually manipulate you into believing something that isn't true. And I think it's important to use logic as the backbone of your approach in order to like shape your experience rather than the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so building frameworks to exploit. First, you have to spot the expert weakness. And this is kind of like a summary. Like, you have to spot the weakness by paying attention. We cannot stress that enough. It's something that myself, Alex, and Christy all say over and over and over is stay off your phones and pay attention.
Definitely.
And then you have to figure out what you want to do, what you think is the exploit to that, if it's like a new one that you're trying to figure out for the first time. And then believe that that's going to work, and then use that to get expert input. Like asking your poker community or, one of us, whether it's in, somewhere in the chip leader platform, and really doing your best to verify that what you think is correct.
Yeah.
And that will allow you to develop a framework, build confidence, and repeat the process. Because at the end of the day, the better you get at spotting the weakness and then attacking it, the more you're going to do it, the more EV you're going to gain. And my dog's freaking out. So
no worries. And I just wanted to say the other part of why this is so important is as you start to notice these patterns within one player, you'll start to be able to identify, obviously no two players are alike, but there's certain tendencies that you'll see within different players, and then you'll get to pick up on that and identify it sooner. So I think it's a really good, as you start this practice of trying to identify these weaknesses, you'll see these patterns and then you'll start to see them, sooner and in other people. So it's just builds upon itself.
And what you're describing is that you're actually building out this framework of your approach through experience by being like, okay, this player did this and this, therefore this makes sense. So now the next time you sit at a table, it's not going to be the same guy, but maybe he follows some similar tendencies. And
Yes.
the human brain tends to work in repeatable processes. So it's very easy. It's very common for you to see one thing, and then there's like an archetype that exists that it's like, oh, this player is like this other guy. And then it's like, we have these, that's why some of the old books, they had like the eagle and the, the lion, whatever, all the different like animals that represented different types of players.
That's the Helmuth way.
Is it Helmuth? Okay, yeah. Well, so like he Helmuth, for all his flaws, is onto some like great things in that aspect, where it's like, if you can categorize different players, and we don't want, the optimal response is to basically recategorize and build out a framework for each individual player in every single moment, but that's pretty unrealistic for most people, at least. And so we want to develop this framework under the assumption that, like, oh, I'm going to be able to start identifying these things as I experience them more. So it's like, this guy is overfolding versus c-bet. Well, what do players who overfold versus c-bets often do? How do they often play pre-flop? What does their 3-bet range look like? What does their check raise range look like? What does their sizing mean? You'll see patterns in these things, especially as you'll see the patterns more and more as you try to start to focus on these aspects of the game as like the clue to the optimal way to play against this opponent type.
Yep.
Absolutely. So we got a little homework for y'all. Take a second to reflect and think of what your biggest mindset leaks are, and then put down examples and write a plan of how to fix them. So that is going to be the end of this portion of today's. We do have the VIP next, so that will be a different link that will be sent out, or has already, I'm not sure. But tomorrow we are doing the championship blueprint, how to build massive stacks, probably the most fun thing in poker. ICM simplified, this over complicated system that everyone discusses is actually not as difficult as it sounds. And then how to make deep runs in big main event fields. I know that there's the Win coming up, or Bahamas, and just in general, all of the random WPT or just main events in general. APT, yeah. So a lot of applicable stuff there. So thank everyone for tuning in today, and we will see those of you who did the VIP. And you guys want to take about a 5-minute break?
Yeah, please.
Okay, we will take 5 minutes, and we will start the next one.